So you want to stop binge eating. Maybe eat one biscuit and before you know it, you've eaten 10. You've lost control, you feel ashamed, and it's secretive. You just can't stop. But you're in the right place. I'm Harriet Frew. This is the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. And today I'm going to do a deep dive into binge eating. And I'm going to talk about 9 triggers for binge eating and what to do about it to stop binging. So first of all, what is binge? What is binge eating? What is a binge? So binge eating isn't simply scoffing an extra biscuit with your morning coffee break. It's something much more than that. It involves eating fast, an extremely large amount of food, more than you would eat in a sort of regular, normal setting at lunch or dinner. And it's usually in secret, and it can really feel a bit like a dissociative or out of control, out of body experience. But you are still fully present and grounded on earth, but it really can feel as though a demon has sort of possessed you and, taken over you. And it can just feel like all your rational decision making has just gone. And although binge eating can be fleetingly euphoric and pleasurable, it tends to be quite short-lived before the guilt, the shame, the self-loathing really descend like a dark cloud. Plus, the physical effects of feeling overfull are really deeply unpleasant and sometimes really painful. So binge eating can happen across all eating disorders, not just binge eating disorder and within disordered eating. So let's talk about why people binge. Okay, number one reason is dietary restriction. So binge eating doesn't happen out of nowhere. In most cases, restrictive eating, dieting, or some kind of deprivation around food have happened pre-binge. Now, if you restrict your eating, your human survival instinct will drive you to eat. Your hunger will be ferocious, and possibly it might feel really out of control. Now, as hunter-gatherers, when we hadn't eaten for several days and then food was available, we would have filled our bellies to the brim. There would be no holding back, no restraint. We're built for survival. Getting fuel in the tank meant life and death back in the day. And we also know from the Minnesota starvation study, post-Second World War, when the men were starved of food, and these were men who didn't have eating disorders, at least before the experiment took place, these men developed binge eating behaviors. They became really preoccupied with food. Some of them started binge eating, and the impact of their hunger was devastating. They described it as this devastating experience on mind and body. And many of them wanted to train as chefs after the experiment. So restrictive eating will often inevitably lead to binge eating. In today's world, restriction might involve not eating enough food, so limiting your calories. It could be not eating enough variety of food. So maybe you're trying to be like super healthy. Perhaps you're cutting out carbohydrates or gluten or dairy, and you're feeling physically and mentally deprived. Or maybe you're delaying eating till later in the day, so you're starving by the time you come to your evening meal. And maybe it's a combination of all those things. Okay, restriction can happen in many ways. Now, in a world where thinness remains highly valued, restrictive eating can feel very good. It can feel like morally superior. But the reality is that as you continue to restrict, you can be extremely vulnerable to the backlash of binge eating. And this can happen to anyone. And it's true as well for all body types, not just people who are thin. Now, restriction in the beginning, it often feels like a honeymoon of self-control, of purity. You're putting your body into a mentally and physically deprived state, though, and that's not usually for most people sustainable. So what action to take if you recognize that you are restricting right now? So notice, first of all, just bring it into your awareness, be honest with yourself. And what are you doing? Maybe you're counting calories, you're not eating enough, so you're missing out food groups, or maybe you're delaying eating. So the first thing is just work to reduce restrictive eating by eating enough food, enough quantity of food, eating regularly, eating from all the food groups, and working not to forbid any foods. And start with really baby steps and build slowly out of your comfort zone. Okay, just start from where you are now. Okay, number 2, you don't prioritize your self-care and regular eating. Now, our culture values productivity, busyness, cramming your day with endless tasks and to-do lists, and it drives satisfaction and self-worth, But when we push that too far, it's often to the detriment of well-being. So you might be busy, busy, busy all the time, and life feels like this endless to-do list. And you find that you are placing yourself at the bottom of the priorities, meeting the demands of everyone else. And this then can mean that perhaps you skip breakfast, maybe you grab something on the go for your lunch, which doesn't really perhaps sustain you. Perhaps you're eating at a screen, you're not really engaged with the eating experience. And then the evening arrives and you are understandably ravenous, you're starving, you're over hungry, and you find that once you start eating, you just can't stop. And your evenings often become a frenzied, out of control haze of numerous trips to the kitchen and endless snacks, and you're falling into that binge eating. And this is in response partly to the physiological need of just simply not eating enough, but also it's partly because you have been so exhausted from emotional labor, from giving out, and there's been no room left to self-care in peaceful and soul-giving ways. So you're kind of using food as that shortcut. So food becomes the quick fix. It's instant, it's gratifying, it's immediate escape to soothing. So if you recognize yourself here, start with really baby steps towards implementing self-caring eating through the day, okay? So prioritize your eating as you would if you were feeding a friend, a child, or a pet. We often treat others way better than ourselves. And think about foods that sustain you and balance your blood sugar, because you will then have improved energy, you will feel more resilient, and you might even have the headspace then to squeeze in a bit of that non-food self-care later on. But start small. If your eating is chaotic, build structure gradually. Always start from where you're at. Okay, number 3, sleep. So poor sleep, it's a trigger for eating, for binge eating, with less self-care. It disrupts your hunger hormones. And of course, you're going to naturally crave sugar and carbohydrates. It's just what happens when we are exhausted. And you'll lean on these foods to get you through the day when you're weary and exhausted. And it can make you so vulnerable as well to binge eating. Now, ultimately, you don't often need extra food when you're tired, but we just kind of use food because we haven't got the time for proper rest and high quality sleep. So we're using those foods to recuperate. So food can be the shortcut almost for that energy when you're feeling just exhausted, tired, weary, all the things. Now, if you have a child who isn't sleeping, or you're going through a stressful period of your life, then maybe you might need to use food a bit to bridge that gap because it's a temporary phase, but it's not ideal for the long term. Sleep is a fundamental need. So what can you do to improve your sleep? I mean, this is the boring, unsexy work. Going to bed early, it can really feel just not very appealing. But if you've had a day full of demands, the evening period offers welcome respite often and personal space. So reflect on your own self-care and work to see sleep as an investment and a healer in your food relationship. Okay. Number 4, alcohol. So alcohol and binge eating can become firmly intertwined. It's the kind of magic combination. I know for me, when I struggled with binge eating, this combination was personally a bit of a nemesis for me. And as a student, I would often drink volumes of cider on an empty stomach. Now, interestingly, allowing those liquid calories, even though I was restricting, no good logic there. But I would inevitably feel starving, hungry after a few drinks, because my blood sugar would be all over the place. And then it would often crash and I'd end up buying food, takeaways, because when I'd been sort of drinking and end up having a massive great binge and it would just really all unravel. And the next day I would have a raging hangover. I'd feel physically ill, craving more sugar and, buy binge foods and do the cycle all over again. So physically and emotionally, it was a roller coaster. So alcohol can often rocket fuel binge eating. So many of my clients that I work with today really, often will have alcohol and binge eating interlinked. But it can really fuel the whole impact of self-loathing, self-disgust. And I remember myself feeling huge amounts of shame around all of this. It was a lonely and secretive struggle. So what can you do if you notice that you have this going on? So I think the important thing is get curious about the impact of alcohol on your eating, reflect on how it's impacting you, and maybe think about a baby step to change. And perhaps it's ensuring that you eat before you start drinking. Perhaps you alternate alcohol with soft drinks or water. It's just these little self-care steps. Okay, number 5, good and bad foods that can trigger binging. So if you struggle with binge eating, we'll usually possess a mindset around like good foods and bad foods. So this will be played out in the dichotomy between foods eaten during a binge and foods eaten at other times, perhaps when you're feeling that you're being good. So you might call them good and bad foods, healthy and unhealthy, or maybe non-binge and binge foods. So it tends to be very, very black and white. And this is very much part of the problem, though, because what happens is the bad foods become linked with anxiety and overexcitement. So they become really, really seductive, compelling, forbidden, and just eating them alone can cause a nervous system response that is anticipatory of binge eating because you're just sort of primed for excitement and fear, really. So your body is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline, you feel fear and guilt, and you end up binge eating. So if you noticed yourself here with this black and white thinking, over time, you need to find a grey area with your eating where all foods can be permitted. Now, this doesn't mean eating donuts all day, but it means letting go of perfection with eating, okay? Now, I have clients who are embedded in orthorexia and over-healthy ideals, trying to be super clean with their eating all the time, clients who are avoiding carbohydrates, or even striving for a carnivore diet, these really extreme regimes, all in the pursuit of health. But stripping your eating down to limited foods is not usually sustainable long term. And it means that certain foods are put on an unnecessary pedestal of desire. They become so special. So they're like dreamed about, they're longed for, they're fantasized over. And they often then are the foods that you will binge on because they become so special. So what you need to do is get the foods off the pedestal. And you do that by gradually allowing a larger variety of foods into your meal repertoire. And you need to do it slowly, maybe just one food at a time if needed. Do it in a structured and supported way so it doesn't feel overwhelming. Now, years ago, I would have described myself as a self-confessed sugar addict and having to eat every bit of cake, chocolate, and cereal in the house during a binge. Now, this is no longer the case. And my cupboards now have stocked with a full array of all the different foods, okay? And I can enjoy them in moderation and feel really relatively peaceful around food. Now, I've only arrived at this place through gradual reintroducing and allowing of the different foods. So they're off the pedestal. Okay, number 6, chasing perfection around eating. So this expands one step further from the good and bad food thinking. So the pursuit of a perfect or right way of eating is often central to the problem of binge eating. So many of my clients who binge eat are pursuing some kind of plan that is too strict to sustain. It's just too rigid. Now, due to diet and wellness culture, there's a plethora of food information available. We're told, aren't we, what to eat all the time. And this fuels the idea that there's a superior way to address food intake. Now, although nutrition is important for health, it is just one part of a larger pie of well-being. Now, there is incredible value in evidence-based nutrition, but what is often missing in this whole perspective is the psychological piece of the puzzle. Now, intermittent fasting, for example, might be helping some people live longer, but what about the significant number of people who will start off doing this intermittent fasting, but will fall into binging, chewing and spitting, and exhibiting disordered eating behaviors in response to this? And this just isn't talked about enough because I see these clients in the therapy room. Now, of course, this isn't life enhancing. It's damaging for mental and physical health. So we need to be including nuance and relationship with food into the wellness picture. So what to do if you recognize yourself here? So recognize if you're pursuing perfect eating and start to think about a more balanced approach to health, including other variables also. So also including things like movement, social aspects, relationships, spirituality, and self-care. These are all important. Okay, number 7, people pleasing. So people who binge eat are generally excellent at looking after others. Now, of course, while it is wonderful to be kind and thoughtful and helpful towards others, it's not so when it comes at a cost to your mental and physical well-being. It's important to include yourself in the picture. So binge eating can often be a reaction to a build-up of feelings of anger, frustration, anxiety, and maybe you feel that you can't express these feelings openly to the people around you. So you stuff your feelings down, you stuff them down, and then you use food to kind of cope. And you feel perhaps selfish or guilty for having your own needs, and you kind of people please again and again and again. So what to do if you recognize yourself here as a bit of a people pleaser? So work towards allowing your needs into the equation. And you don't have to become a selfish monster to achieve this. It's about balancing the seesaw to include the needs of others and to balance your needs too, just getting that nice equation. So understand as well that people pleasing isn't authentic. If your relationships are based on suppressing your own needs, constantly having to please the other people, people are engaging with a fake version of you. Now, I know from my own journey, understanding this has helped me significantly in overcoming my own people pleasing, as authenticity is absolutely one of my highest values. Okay, number 8, rebelling against your inner critic. Now, as human beings, no one likes to feel criticized and controlled, and not by others and not by yourself. So you might feel that your inner critic is serving you and helping you strive. And so many of my clients have such a strong critic. But in reality, you will likely rebel and push back against it. Now, if your inner critic has hard and fast rules about what you should do, what you shouldn't do, if it's always telling you, all these rigid rules, you might follow these rules for a while and be the kind of good person, but eventually you'll grow weary of the rules and you're probably going to rebel. And the rebellion may feel fleetingly freeing and liberating when you binge, escape planet Earth a bit and just, 2 fingers up to the world. But later you'll be hard on yourself about the rebellion. It will lead to further self-sabotage, self-criticism, self-punishment, and a likely eroding of self-esteem and a high degree of self-loathing. So what to do if you recognize that you have a strong inner critic? So work towards being kinder and self-compassionate. Okay, this is far more motivating and an enjoyable way to navigate your journey through life. And you would be kind and compassionate to a friend or a child or pet. So you deserve to be treated in exactly the same way. And start small. Okay, it might feel very unnatural to begin with. Okay, and number 9, catastrophizing setbacks. So recovery from binge eating is not linear. It's not a nice, smooth journey. It's often 1 step forward and 2 steps back. Now, if you catastrophize the imperfections which are going to happen of your recovery journey and berate yourself, when you do veer from that path, you're likely to throw in the towel and feel hopeless and just feel like there's no point and all of those things. And you'll use language that catastrophizes a situation such as, this is such a disaster, you're a mess, you failed. And then, of course, you're going to feel disappointment. You're going to feel disgust towards your poor self. And this will lead to self-punishing behaviors and a great deal of misery. So what to do if you recognize yourself here? Remember that every setback is a learning experience. Reframe it in that way. Every time that you have a blip, you can learn and refine your awareness and can understand your triggers much better. Binge eating is a coping strategy. So be kind to yourself. In the moment, you are reaching for a well-known and safe life raft, albeit maladaptive, but it's just in the eye of that storm. It's familiar, but you can learn. You can forgive yourself and you can move on. And you haven't failed. Okay, it's all learning. And you're an imperfect human, as we all are, on a journey, and you will get there. Okay, so I hope this has given you some helpful pointers towards understanding your binge eating. Binge eating is something that many, many people struggle with. If you relate to anything in this video, I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments. Do share below. Thank you so much. And thank you for watching this episode of the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. And if you want to check out other audio episodes, I have got over 450 episodes on the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. Do go and search it out on any platform. Thank you so much for listening, watching. I look forward to sharing another episode very soon.